In this podcast episode, the hosts welcome Thomas Small, a renowned expert on the Syrian Civil War, to provide an in-depth analysis of the complex geopolitical landscape of Syria. Over the course of the discussion, they cover a range of topics that illuminate the historical, political, and social dynamics at play in the region. Small begins by tracing the roots of the Syrian Civil War back to the Arab Spring, which ignited in late 2010. The self-immolation of a Tunisian man sparked widespread protests across the Arab world, including Syria. In March 2011, protests erupted against the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad, who responded with violent crackdowns. This initial wave of protests was characterized by a lack of centralized organization, unlike the protests in Egypt, which were concentrated in Tahrir Square. The Syrian protests were organic and scattered, fueled by widespread discontent with the oppressive government. As the regime's violence escalated, it led to further protests and ultimately the defection of military personnel. This resulted in the formation of the Free Syrian Army, marking the transition from protests to armed conflict. The civil war that ensued became a complex battleground involving various factions, foreign powers, and extremist groups, setting the stage for a protracted and devastating conflict. The Syrian Civil War attracted the attention of numerous foreign powers, each with its own interests. Small highlights the involvement of Russia, Iran, Turkey, the United States, and Israel, among others. Russia's historical ties to Syria, dating back to the Soviet era, motivated its military intervention in 2015 to support the Assad regime. Iran, a longtime ally of Assad, provided military and financial support, while Turkey sought to counter Kurdish influence in the region. The United States initially hesitated to intervene, fearing the chaos that might ensue from Assad's downfall. However, as the conflict escalated, the U.S. began to support certain opposition groups, complicating the situation further. The involvement of these foreign powers not only intensified the conflict, but also transformed it into a proxy war, with each actor pursuing its own geopolitical agenda. One of the most significant developments in the Syrian Civil War was the rise of jihadist groups, particularly ISIS. Small explains how the Assad regime, in a bid to discredit the non-jihadist opposition, released jihadist prisoners from its notorious Sednaya prison. This strategic move backfired, as it allowed jihadist factions to gain a foothold in the conflict. The emergence of ISIS, which grew out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, further complicated the landscape, leading to brutal violence and terror that extended beyond Syria's borders. The rise of jihadism not only posed a threat to the Assad regime, but also to regional stability. ISIS's brutal tactics and territorial ambitions attracted foreign fighters and led to a global response, including military interventions by various countries. The jihadist narrative gained traction among disillusioned youth, further fueling the conflict and creating a cycle of violence that seemed unending. The use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime marked a turning point in the Syrian conflict. Small discusses how the regime's deployment of chemical agents against civilians crossed a red line set by then-President Barack Obama. Despite this, the U.S. did not intervene militarily, which emboldened Assad and allowed him to continue his brutal campaign against the opposition. The failure to respond to the use of chemical weapons not only undermined U.S. credibility, but also signaled to other actors that the international community was unwilling to take decisive action. The consequences of chemical weapon use were profound, leading to widespread condemnation and calls for accountability. However, the lack of effective intervention allowed the Assad regime to consolidate power and continue its violent repression of dissent. This created a sense of impunity that would characterize the regime's actions throughout the war. The Kurdish population in Syria played a crucial role in the conflict, particularly through the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, which emerged as a key ally of the United States in the fight against ISIS. Small explains how the Kurds, historically marginalized in Syria, seized the opportunity presented by the chaos of the civil war to establish autonomous governance in northern Syria. Their effective military campaigns against ISIS garnered international support, but also heightened tensions with Turkey, which viewed Kurdish autonomy as a threat to its national security. The Kurdish situation in Syria is emblematic of the broader ethnic and sectarian divisions in the country. As the conflict evolved, the Kurds found themselves navigating a complex landscape of alliances and enmities, balancing their aspirations for autonomy with the realities of regional geopolitics. The future of Kurdish governance in Syria remains uncertain, particularly in light of shifting alliances and the potential for renewed conflict. The Syrian Civil War has resulted in one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. Small highlights the staggering statistics. Millions of people displaced, countless lives lost, and entire cities reduced to rubble. The war has created a generation of refugees, many of whom have fled to neighboring countries or sought asylum in Europe. The humanitarian response has been hampered by ongoing violence, bureaucratic obstacles, and the sheer scale of the crisis. The international community's response has been criticized for its inadequacy, with many organizations struggling to provide essential aid to those in need. The suffering of the Syrian people has often been overshadowed by geopolitical considerations, leading to a sense of despair among those affected by the conflict. Small emphasizes the importance of addressing the humanitarian needs of the population, as the war's legacy will continue to impact future generations. As the discussion shifts to the future of Bashar al-Assad, Small notes that the regime's survival has been a contentious issue. While Assad has managed to maintain power with the support of Russia and Iran, his legitimacy remains in question. The recent developments in Syria, including the rise of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the potential for a new governance structure, raise important questions about Assad's future role in the country. The prospect of a post-Assad Syria is fraught with uncertainty. Small suggests that while Assad may have been able to cling to power, the dynamics of the conflict have shifted significantly. The emergence of new actors and the changing geopolitical landscape could lead to a reevaluation of Assad's position, particularly if Hayat Tahrir al-Sham consolidates its power and seeks to establish a new order in Syria. Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has emerged as a key figure in the evolving landscape of Syria. Small discusses how al-Jolani has sought to rebrand Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as a nationalist movement, distancing it from its jihadist roots. This shift has allowed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to gain some degree of legitimacy and support among the local population, as it positions itself as a viable alternative to the Assad regime. Al-Jolani's pragmatism is evident in his approach to governance in Idlib province, where Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has established a functioning administration. Small notes that while Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has faced criticism for its past affiliations, its ability to provide governance and stability in a war-torn region has garnered some support. The question remains whether al-Jolani can maintain this balance and navigate the complex dynamics of Syrian politics moving forward. The geopolitical landscape surrounding Syria is intricate and constantly shifting. Small emphasizes the interplay between various actors, including Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the United States, each pursuing its own interests. The recent normalization efforts between Assad and regional powers, particularly Saudi Arabia, signal a potential shift in alliances that could reshape the future of the region. The implications of these geopolitical maneuvers extend beyond Syria's borders. Small discusses how the outcomes of the Syrian conflict will influence broader regional dynamics, including relations between Iran and its adversaries, the stability of neighboring countries, and the potential for renewed conflict. The complexity of these relationships underscores the challenges of achieving a lasting resolution to the Syrian crisis. Despite the territorial defeat of ISIS, the threat of its resurgence remains a concern. Small explains that pockets of ISIS fighters continue to exist in Syria, and the potential for a revival of the group is heightened by the instability in the region. The ongoing presence of ISIS prisoners and the possibility of their release further complicate the security landscape. The international community must remain vigilant in addressing the conditions that allowed ISIS to thrive in the first place. Small argues that without a comprehensive strategy to combat extremism and address the underlying grievances that fuel radicalization, the threat of ISIS will persist. The lessons learned from the Syrian conflict must inform future efforts to prevent the rise of similar groups.